There's still a lot of competition for jobs right now. So I think onboarding tends to be reactive in that same space of like, how long from the time they apply for the job till they're actually starting.
It's that chaotic time of year where HR is onboarding in masses, making sure that the holidays are well accounted for and meeting that demand. So what you just saw was a clip from Leslie Wireback. She's the founder and coach of Wireback Works, and we really cover it all in this webinar coming up, talking about the biggest misconceptions when it comes to onboarding for on-seasons, how to onboard in bulk while making sure employees are well assimilated culturally, and how to make sure that new hires hit the ground running and come back next year for loyalty reasons. Again, guys, we really get into it. Feel free to comment down below on your favorite part of this webinar. And without further ado, let's get into it. Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Today, we are going to talk a little bit about how to onboard quickly with seasonal employees. My name is Meredith Gershenson. I'm a research analyst here at workforce.com. To give a little background on Workforce for those who are not familiar, we are a full-service HCM software company that specializes for businesses with hourly staff. So everything from scheduling to payroll to time and attendance to HRIS and so much more. As you guys know, we work with thousands of these hourly staff businesses. So as a result, our software actually helps companies onboard hundreds of thousands of employees every year. Because of this, we're actually able to see the correlations between onboarding, engagement, and even skill development, which is really cool. I am joined with a very special guest, Leslie Wireback. Leslie, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Meredith. I'm excited.
Awesome. Leslie is the founder of Wireback Works. Leslie has spent her career in human resources with over 20 years of experience from HR intern to HR department to CHRO. She is well versed in the challenges of balancing employee relations and managing business needs and expectations. Leslie specializes in partnering with business leaders and HR staff to enable their success individually and collectively within organizations that they work. Awesome. I want to shoot out a little poll question, if you will, for the comments section. So guys, comment down below. Do your seasonal employees typically come back for future on seasons? And why do you think they do, or why don't they? I want to get things kicked off first and foremost, Leslie, with this first question that we have here. I would love for you to tell us a little bit about Wireback Works and, some of the experience that you do with hourly wage industries.
Sure. Great. So at Wireback Works, you gave a lot of background on me already as the founder, but what we do with our team is providing workplace transformation through thoughtful and intentional approaches. So that's utilizing coaching, consulting, and learning. Mm-hmm. So kind of in common language, fractional HR services for small businesses and nonprofits, one-on-one coaching services generally for leaders and human resources professionals is where I specialize, and then group and team learning. So working to, improve teamwork at all of the workplaces, develop leaders with that. And, in hourly wage, when I was in companies. So I worked at a waste authority for a majority of my career. Also spent about 5 years at a newspaper very early on in my career, and another manufacturing business as well. So the majority of my career has been in places that are much more driven by hourly workforce than a salaried professional workforce.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, the nature of hourly wage businesses like manufacturing, it's very much high turnover, right? And there's a lot of that going on with onboarding and even offboarding employees, especially as we're coming up on the holiday season. Seasonal employees are huge. So I'm curious, how often are you actually dealing with onboarding related issues with your clients?
The simple answer is regularly, all the time.
Fair enough.
But it really does flow with kind of the state of the market. That's as I was really thinking about this, when recruiting becomes much more challenging, it makes that a bigger issue of onboarding too, because everybody's kind of fighting the same fight there. Yeah. And I think it makes it a slower process if it's harder to hire. It has to be a faster process when there's lots of competition and that's all happening. So it kind of compresses everything in that timeline is how I see it. So, there's still a lot of competition for jobs right now. So I think onboarding tends to be reactive in that same space of like, how long from the time they apply for the job till they're actually starting and ready to go? And what does that look like?
I think that's a really great point. We'll definitely get into the timeline aspect of onboarding employees later, but I think that idea of quickly onboarding employees, right? That's a huge, huge focus, especially within these hourly wage industries. So when it comes to seasonal hires, what's the biggest challenge or misconception HR actually comes across typically?
So I think the biggest challenge is volume and time. So, it's a quick push for hiring generally a large quantity of employees. So even when it's anticipated for upcoming holidays or for the summer, you always have to ramp up. It's still a push. Like, you can only do it in such finite time period. I think the misconception is that it can be done faster than any other regular hiring and onboarding. There's not too many shortcuts you can take. You're still working with people in that process, and it has to happen. I know we might talk a little bit more about where you can find some efficiencies or less time in the onboarding, but overall, the hiring process is still the hiring process.
Absolutely. In terms of onboarding in bulk, I want to get into that a little bit more. Can you share some of those best practices for actually streamlining the onboarding process when it comes to bringing on more than just one employee at a time, right? We're talking 10 to maybe even 15, or maybe even sometimes less, but talking in bulk, right? So what are some best practices there?
Yeah, I think key best practice is making it consistent and repeatable. So thinking about, we have this time frame where we have to onboard 10 to 15 people at a time. What can be consistent and repeatable with that? If you at 10 people, is everybody still able to learn and be engaged? If we get to 15, what's lost, or is 15 still a reasonable number? I have clients where they have a regular schedule of it. This is how they go through the volume. So on this week is when everybody starts. They do this on this day. So they have it consistent, so that anybody involved in onboarding is able to plan for it and be able to make the new hires feel welcome.
Definitely. I want to point to this very first slide that we've got here. It talks a little bit about tips to streamline your onboarding process. It's actually a really great article from GGA Solutions. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this, Leslie, in terms of, looking at these top 4 tips, identifying essential skills, then breaking it down, then utilizing technology, and then providing hands-on experience? Does this kind of fit the format that you would maybe follow with clients?
It does. So I actually really loved this, and when you shared it with me, thinking, I don't know what I would change.
Right.
So kudos on the source of this, but really you are talking about the skills. What do you need to have them know? I like the modular approach, because again, as we talked earlier, you can't take out everything. You still have a core you have to do, but maybe there are pieces that don't apply. So how can you break that out? As well as, you don't want to overwhelm the new people. So the module for that is great. And, bringing in technology so that it's simple, and for the new hires, as well as the HR departments and managers administering it. And of course, hands-on. Like, if all they're doing is sitting there learning in front of a computer, it's not going to be very effective, and people are going to be bored.
Yeah, definitely. I love the aspect of making sure we're not overwhelming the employees, right? Especially those that are coming on who might be brand new. Maybe they're not returning employees per se. They're brand new to the company. They're learning the skills, the tricks of the trade, and identifying those essential skills. I really think that is so important, and making sure, hey, we're filling those skills with this employee specifically is absolutely key, right? Looking at those as a, bullet point suggest, those core competencies. I think that's so important.
Right.
Within hourly wage industries, obviously employee turnover is very high, as we said. How can HR actually ensure new hires become productive team members pretty quickly, even if they're only there for maybe a couple weeks, months max?
Yeah. So I would again go back to what's essential to start. So maybe for that first week, they only need to do this piece of the onboarding. They don't need if it's like a safety certification, they don't need that in week 1 because they're shadowing or whatever. So do what is only essential to start and can make it most efficient. So instead of presenting like for the whole first day, we're going to go through everything. What if it's a small block each day for a full week so that they can get to work quickly, and you also are meeting all the expectations of giving them the knowledge and skills to be effective.
Absolutely. And again, like we said before, like making sure that those core competencies, are identified, they're set in stone, and it's easy for that employee to say, okay, this is what I need to learn first and foremost. And, maybe skills following are more nice to haves at that point, and they'll pick them up naturally along the way. So yeah, I think, again, setting up that kind of syllabus style of training, making sure that, hey, we have something for every day of this week for the employee to learn, to be able to grow in terms of whatever skill you have identified as those cores. Awesome. In terms of technology, digital tools, do you recommend anything for automating and just kind of accelerating that onboarding process? I know we kind of talked about you can only get so quick with these onboarding processes. Do you recommend any technology there?
So my recommendation is always to use the tools and software you have. So I wouldn't want anyone to say, oh, I can't make my process more efficient because I don't have this new flashy software, but you have something. I've seen people use Google Forms really effectively to get at least basic information. Obviously not maybe all the confidential information, but utilizing what you have, how can you leverage that? Putting your onboarding within the software and automating the process flows and signatures would definitely be that next step, so that in essence, your checklist is there automated. They can't get to this next step unless they've submitted the first one, so that all of your compliance happens. They don't get all of this information perhaps until they've passed the drug test. And then from that, what's the next one? And make it flow there. I think also giving access to the people who need it. I've seen it where it's too controlled by human resources, and yet there's different pieces within onboarding that the manager needs to be a part of it. And so making sure that everyone has the right access at the right time so that flows. And again, technology can help with that based on permissions, access, everything like that. And then tailoring it to your employee base, seasonal, probably much more quick, perhaps younger audience, use a mobile app for easier accessibility. Also, I've seen where they can upload their IDs easier, faster. So I've seen some technologies that do that really well, others where it's kind of like you're fumbling along and a typical technological user would not be able to figure out how to do it. So it's that easy. I even experienced it. I was doing like contract work for someone and it was like, oh my gosh. And they're like, why haven't you done this yet? It's like, because I have to go get my passport, take a picture, upload it. Like it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
It wasn't a snap from my phone, upload, a nice quality picture of my passport. And that slowed me down.
Yeah, definitely. I really like the point that you made on making sure that we're pairing up technology and, human interaction, HR management together and not just relying completely on technology. We've, especially on our side, on the software side of things, we've seen our fair share of horrible UI, UX, horrible design of a product and making it actually so much harder to upload your documents, all that stuff, where we've taken all that into account. We actually had, I was talking to John, he is an HRS manager over at Reef Parking, and they onboard a ton of employees. I want to say anywhere from 1,000, 2,000 employees during the summer seasons. They have a lot of fluctuations there. They have a lot of people coming on to help with the Reef Parking aspect of their business model. And John was saying how they really utilize the mobile onboarding feature a ton. That's something that has, again, it allows him to really double check that documentation. It's already pre-uploaded because of the mobile onboarding feature. A lot of these employees are very equipped with technology already. They have their own phones. It's easy. It takes a couple of minutes to onboard each and every staff member. So that way, managers aren't running around with their heads cut off, right? And it's huge for them. And of course, John being the head manager in this case, it's so easy for him to track, okay, who are we bringing on? And then when the time comes, we need to offboard these employees really seamlessly. And it's easy. It's all simple. It's all right there on their phone. And in terms of the management side of things, right on the desktop. So I totally hear you in terms of, we see a lot of those pieces of technology that feels like more of a nice to have, where, with workforce, it's a necessary requirement for a lot of our clients. They need to have this, or else they're not going to be able to onboard the mass amounts of employees that they have during their on season. It's crazy though. Yeah.
Well, and you made me think of, I had a client who, for whatever reason, they were still mailing the form the person needed for their drug for their drug screen. So like, one, you were relying on the mail to get it there, and then you missed, like, it was a terrible delay because they had onboarding scheduled at a set, like every other week they were onboarding people, and people would miss it because they hadn't completed that step, and it was the mail. So that was one of the first things of, how do we make this automated so that could happen faster. Plus people were like, I was like, you're mailing something?
Wow. I mean, that is very retro of them. I love it, but it probably takes a whole lot of time. I mean, yeah, geez, that poor manager is probably just drowning in paperwork, but
yeah,
you know what? Hopefully, maybe they'll watch this webinar and sign on with Workforce, and we'll go from there.
they'll see the possibilities.
Exactly. We'll get them off pen and paper soon enough. Hopefully, right? Awesome. So in terms of, talking about assimilation to technology, in terms of cultural assimilation and actually aligning new hires with the company values, all that good stuff, how can HR ensure that seasonal staff actually quickly feels connected to the team?
Yeah, I think one of the greatest ideas that I see that works really well is assigning a guide or a mentor. I know some places call the person a buddy, whatever that may be in your workplace culture language, having them paired with someone. If it's so many new hires, you could make a small group, but that they have an experienced employee paired with them to help as a guide, so that when they have questions, they can go to that person and not feel like they're bothering someone, not question if it's a dumb question, like I should have known this, that they have that. And I think it's critical to have them interact with staff that's not only the seasonal. So yes, you're onboarding 10 or 15 seasonal employees, but you want to make sure they're integrated very quickly with the staff that's already there, so that they don't feel isolated. I always, people bond over food. So as quickly as you can have lunch breaks as a social opportunity with other staff, as well as leaders, that's a great time for department leader, company leader to get to meet the new employees, welcome them, make them feel a part of the team, not only seasonal, but they're really integrated as a key part of the team. When you need that much seasonal help, they are a key part of your team. And then quick daily check-ins, putting that on either a manager, or if that's part of the guide or the mentor, that they have these daily check-ins, so that if something came up yesterday, they have that chance to ask the question, or even end of day, so that they could ask the question before they go home, so they know what to expect the next day.
I love the idea of a mentor buddy, or somebody that they can just kind of partner up with. It's not necessarily a manager or even the HR manager, head of HR, whoever. I think it's really nice to kind of have somebody typically within their age cohort that they can kind of rely on, they can lean on a little bit for those questions that they might feel like are insignificant to ask a manager or someone, who's upper level manager. My question for you is, I was talking to a friend about this, and she was saying how she is kind of that person within her role, and she works for, a bigger corporate company, granted, but she's that person for, all the questions that new hires come to. And I think she's that person because she's kind of allowed herself to be that person, but it's actually taking away a little bit from her job and the things that she's actually able to accomplish, because she's getting so many questions from so many of these new employees that have actually come on into the holiday season. So I'm curious, what would you say in terms of balancing that aspect? Because I think the last thing that managers want to do is actually take away work from those who are experienced employees, of course, from, getting distracted with answering all those questions as a buddy or a mentor.
Right. I think within that, so for your friend, there's probably a reason that your friend is the go-to based on warmth, comfortability.
Sure.
People
Yeah.
are coming to them. So then what can the employer learn from that, and how to make sure they are paired with someone else, or that there's designated hours for these questions? Like, hey, we're going to have a come ask your question time with so-and-so. This is when you can do it. Or, that it's at certain break times so that it isn't so overwhelming. And my other thought would be, take all those typical questions that he or she's getting and make a frequently asked questions guide. Like, okay, yep, this is the question I get from every new hire. All right, how do you build that in your process? And, oh, they don't ask this to day 2 or 3, whatever, based on what their flow of learning is, then make sure they get that information timely there to help. I mean, it's nice that they feel comfortable, but as you said, it also can detract. And as quickly as you want the new hires to be effective, you also don't want to make your current employees ineffective.
Absolutely. I think that's such a good point. If for our audience, obviously primarily being in HR, if you guys are enacting a mentor, a buddy of some sort, check in with those buddies, right? Making sure that, hey, are you feeling like you can get your work done first and foremost? And second, what maybe are those FAQs that you typically get asked? And building off of that, I think, again, this is all collateral that is not only from your frontline staff, straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, but it's something that you can actually flip and make into PDFs or, a little pamphlet of, hey, here is something that is a really great tool to actually more quickly onboard our staff at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah.
In terms of the roles that, require really specific training and even certifications, possibly, what advice do you have for HR to expedite the training and certification processes without sacrificing quality, compliance, and safety?
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
I really I had to think about that. And in my mind, I had to think about, like, what would it be that needed to kind of have that switch? So abbreviated version, obviously, if possible. The example I thought of is, like, I know there's 40-hour OSHA training, but there's also 10-hour OSHA training. Sure. So how does that specifically apply? And you don't need to go above and beyond for the seasonal if the other one gets them started. Maybe they do it later, but this way you get them through their first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days with the lesser time frame of that. I remember there was a specific training that we had with Waste Authority employees, and we could do like an 8-hour versus a 24-hour for that. The other thought is utilizing on-demand technology. So these trainings and that onboarding, it doesn't all have to happen within the workday. So if you're leveraging technology, anything like that, the employees can view this on their own before they come in. You can record and still pay them for it, but that can help get them up to speed faster so that you're not sacrificing that in kind of, if you're only hiring them for 2 months over the holidays, you don't want to spend the whole first week in training, probably, I would assume.
Yeah, definitely. And again, using even technology to help kind of making sure, hey, we are filling the skills, we're filling the training gaps that we have with this employee, and this employee, and making sure that you're not necessarily, having people train for unnecessary reasons, of course, making sure that it's something, hey, we actually have this person who we can call on for this season, who is already trained in this way. And again, this is something that, I'm referencing our skills matrix here that we have at Workforce in terms of making sure that this training, this certification is actually accounted for, and we have the employees kind of in our back pocket in our roster who already have this filled out. So referencing that skills matrix, making sure that it's filled immediately. And it's something that is so important for that organizational aspect. And of course, for compliance reasons, for safety reasons, right? If we're talking manufacturing, if we're talking healthcare, right? It's huge. It's absolutely important and necessary to make sure that correct trainings are in place and we're not rushing through it. We already have employees maybe at our fingertips or who we can call on during that time where it gets really busy, that we can say, hey, we need somebody who can fill this role because that's what we're, needing in our matrix right now. So whatever it might be there, for sure. In terms of making sure that staff actually is hitting the ground running when it comes to onboarding, what are some key resources or training materials or even equipment that employers should have readily available to ensure seasonal employees can actually start just effectively working from day one?
Yeah. So I think that is having it all outlined. Like, what does this look like step by step, and making sure that it's clear for them. So do they need any sort of equipment before they show up on the first day? Are you providing any sort of personal protective equipment there on the first day, and kind of marking that as part of your process? That was the one thing that I was thinking, how does that work? What does that look like for each of the employees, as well as how are they getting access to it? I had someone recently, and their 30-day feedback was, I had these different things on my roadmap, which was great, but then I had to go back to IT on this day and get access to, it was on my roadmap, but it wasn't coordinated that I actually had a username and password to get into it. So it's also mapping it out from that full scope of, yes, you're going to get here. We need to make sure you have an IT meeting first so that then you can actually do this training or access this resource that you need. So they had a great suggestion of, why don't we build that earlier in the timeline where there's a half hour with IT and I get this whole list of access, and then I know I'm ready to go. So I think it's also soliciting the employees as they go through it, what could be improved. So continually looking at that as well.
I love that. Constant improvement. We've talked about that. We actually had a webinar a couple weeks ago on designing a retention strategy, and we had on a guest, Margaret Jackson. She was amazing. 10 out of 10, recommend checking out that webinar. But she always talks about, I constantly am reviewing our retention program. Once we're comfortable with it, I'm going back and saying, what can we do? She's like, almost month to month, I'm reviewing these programs. And again, I think that's such a good point, reviewing what that onboarding program looks like in this case, what those materials look like, how can you improve on those? I actually want to share this next slide that we've got on, let's see if it pulls up, on what training materials to actually take into consideration. We talked a little bit about, mentors, peer buddies, whatever it is, FAQs, right? And that's what we're seeing on the right side here. But first and foremost, looking at the standardized training materials, PPEs, anything like that. Then we're looking at visual aids and interactive content. I think that's kind of taking it a step further, maybe working on, again, these infographics, maybe even e-learning modules, anything like that, I think is super awesome if a company has access to those types of materials. And again, worst comes to worst, you put together your own little FAQ, you put together your own little PDF or infographic. Leslie, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this slide. Does this kind of cover the gamut, so to speak?
It does. I think this is a great one. And I'll go back to the original of starting where you are. And if you're like, well, I don't have the technology to do this, we all have cell phones. You can record a short little video of how to do something within there to break up the reading. I had that with a client just yesterday. We were talking about it. We're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be boring. And I was like, how about here, one of us talk through it instead of having them read this, so that they could watch it on the video. Then it's also documented for future and can be reused. So use what you have. And to your point of the other guest, and don't be afraid to update it. You can start with that video, and then later you're able to update it once you have different technology or additional resources. Plus, you get the opportunity to test and know if it's an effective way of having them learn this, because you don't want to spend thousands on video and all of that, and it doesn't actually help them learn. So I think that is a piece. But from an HR standpoint, I think the standardization is critical to ensure that everything is covered. And then, you don't want someone getting hurt because it wasn't covered. You don't want someone ending up not performing because they weren't shown how to do something properly either.
Absolutely. And again, that baseline, those comprehensive training manuals, as that first box on the left says, or handbooks, whatever it is, making sure that that's really easy to access, making sure it's digitized. We actually just released just a really cool small feature in terms of an mobile employee handbook. So it's really easy that an employee can access that super quickly. It's not some, dusty printed out PDF sitting in a desk somewhere or in the back of a closet somewhere in the office. It's right there in their palm. It's easy to access, and it's something that they're pretty much able to reference if they ever have any questions. You can put in those FAQs in there, whatever it is. So yeah, and again, just making sure you got the bases covered, right? You're talking to your frontline staff, you're maybe talking to those peer mentors, those buddies, those aides who are able to say, hey, this is something that a lot of people are really confused about, and here's what we need to flesh out a little bit more in our FAQs or even in our training manuals. So yeah, whatever that looks like to you guys, obviously cater it to that.
Well, and I had another thought as you were talking about this, Meredith, is when you're doing all these training materials, you talked about like the handbook so they can review it. I mean, that's the most, I'm going to say it, most boring thing for someone to have to do on their first day. So even without technology, I've always utilized the method of telling stories. When you're talking about a policy that they need to know, talk about a story about how this can come into play. Give examples of what it looks like so that then they remember it, or at least remember like, oh, I remember on my first day, HR told me about that. I know that's in the handbook because they shared this story about so-and-so or whatever. I think that makes it a lot more helpful in the learning process, because otherwise it can be a lot of information overload when you're starting a new job.
Absolutely. And you even said at the very beginning, right, making sure that there's dedicated hours, maybe even days of the first couple weeks of onboarding employees where it doesn't necessarily feel overwhelming. You're spacing it out. You're getting them involved in the company still, right? You're assimilating them into the culture, the values, the goals of the company itself. And yeah, making sure that it's not overwhelming, right? Making sure that we're not kind of throwing them in the deep end or easing them in way too slow where they feel like they're just getting bombarded with information or manual tossed at them, right? So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
In terms of successful strategies for pre-boarding or prepping seasonal employees, do you have any examples, of any stories where employees arrive on their first day and they're well prepped or they feel like they've been pre-boarded very well?
Well, the first thing that came to mind was examples of what not to do, not like the great ones.
Yeah.
But I even remember one of my first jobs, and I got there and they were doing construction on the entrance and I didn't know how to get in the building. So to me, that has set the expectation of send a guide of what to expect before their first day. If that's another email or they get a text like, hey, at such and such time, we'll meet you at the front door. So-and-so will be there to greet you. Make sure that all of that is clear, because there is so much going on in a new person's head when they're coming to work that day that anything you can take out of like that they have to guess will be helpful for them. So sending a guide of what to expect on your first day is an incredible way to make sure that it's a success. And also, what came to my mind with seasonal employees is this could be their first job. This could be the first opportunity that they're joining the workforce, because that's often an entry point. So making sure to cater to the needs and questions that they may have. I've experienced it with employees who have no idea how to fill out a W-4 or what their I-9 looks like. So if you're not doing that electronically beforehand and they're going to have to do that on the first day, making sure that you can help prep them, at least with bringing the right information, helping give examples of how they might think about this, what they may need to ask even at home with their family so that they're prepared to answer those questions. Those are critical. And, don't forget what to wear. Are you taking them to lunch on their first day, or should they be packing a lunch? If so, is there a fridge? There's all these tiny details that if it's someone like me, I'm going to worry about them. I remember on my first day sitting in my office and it was like 12:30 and no one had said anything about a lunch break. They had left me alone with my paperwork because I was HR. And I was like, I guess I can go to lunch now. So you don't want a new hire to have that experience. You've thought of all of that for them and you are their guide, or they have someone else that is their guide. So if HR is not handling it, their manager is, or someone else is appointed to do that so that they're not left wondering.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And again, I keep going back to this mentor, this buddy, because I think it's really important. I've actually been that person where somebody was coming on, we had a new employee coming on board, and she was, very green, very new, fresh out of college. And I was that person, that contact for her. And I loved it. She was asking me about dress code and everything from lunch and stuff like that. And it's little questions like that. And she came in feeling really good, really confident. Obviously, we had our HR manager kind of show her around, but I was also there to introduce her to people. And it was really special, not only for me, made me feel really good to be able to be that person for her, but also it was great to have somebody where, she was just kind of wondering about the little things at the office that I was more than happy to kind of show for her and, be that buddy essentially. So yeah, it's those little things that make such a big difference in making sure that this new employee is feeling really well acquainted and assimilated in the culture from day one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. On a broader scale, what structural practices can HR actually implement to reduce the time between new hires' arrival and their ability to contribute productively to the organization's goals?
So I think this is making sure that you have a checklist and a process and a flow that applies appropriately to the role. So obviously some things have to be the same for everyone. Some things can vary. And so how quickly can you let someone get to work? I often hear the experiences of people had their first day and they go home and, how was it? And they're like, I don't know, I just filled out a bunch of paperwork, or I just watched videos. You don't give them a taste of what they get to do, even if they're shadowing. But if they can actually do some work on the first day, that's a great way of making it an impression and getting them excited about the company that they've just joined.
I think we have this really great feature with the onboarding checklist, and it's really more for HR managers to be able to say, okay, we got everything accounted for, we got this document in order, they've toured the floors of whatever the company is, they've met all of these people, et cetera, whatever their checklist is. And I've actually seen companies showing this checklist, they're kind of sharing this checklist with employees, with new hires, and saying, hey, this is what we're going to run through today. Here's what Monday is going to look like. Here's what Monday afternoon is going to look like. Here's what Tuesday morning is. And actually showing them this checklist and saying, you're a part of this, and you actually have a say in kind of where this onboarding process is going. It actually makes that employee feel like they're hitting the ground running, not only, but also, hey, I actually have a say in what this onboarding looks like for this new company. It really builds loyalty. I've heard awesome feedback with people, actually, these managers sharing this onboarding checklist that Workforce has with their new hires and saying, this has been great for actually making them feel like they're, already achieving what they need to achieve. They're reaching those organizational goals. So yeah, I think that's such a good point, and making sure that they kind of feel like they have the reins a little bit on their own onboarding, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think there's a balance of putting them in control of it and making sure that they get led down the path.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The one thing that came to my mind was someone with a beautiful onboarding process, and it was like, here, you're going to meet with so-and-so and so-and-so. But the meetings weren't set up. So till the new hire got to that point, that person's calendar was full. So also proactively making sure that there's time built in, or maybe giving them options. Here's the 2 options for meeting with this manager or this other person that you need to learn from, so that they have control, but also they have a plan.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a good point. And especially when we're taking consideration, HR introducing people, new hires to upper management or C-suite, even whoever might be a little bit harder to reach, making sure that they actually have time in their calendar blocked off to be able to do so. Absolutely. I completely agree. When it comes to quickly integrating seasonal employees into the existing workforce, into the staff that's actually already been there, what cultural practices or even team building activities have proven to be effective in creating that sense of belonging and collaboration amongst all team members?
Yeah. So I think culturally, you just said about meeting like the executives as well. So making sure the introductions are there all throughout the organization. So that's part of it. I think tours, you talked about like walking plant floors, anything like that. Tours even within office buildings, so people know where to find different things. Always a fan of lunch, either with the team or the manager or both, however that may look. And formalizing the check-ins throughout the process. So where are the different checkpoints that we're going to have with you, and what kind of things are we going to be asking for feedback on? So then having specific times to seek feedback from the manager, from human resources, so that the new hires have that opportunity and are able to help improve the process for others.
Absolutely. I love that. In terms of making the right first impression, I'm going to point to this next slide that we have right here on, it's actually a really cool case study from UW-Madison, and this is their agricultural program that they have here. And they really laid it out. There's a lot going on this slide, but they laid it out in terms of their top 5 steps in making sure that the company is showing up and showing out for their new employees. So first of all, talking about that initial welcome, making sure that you got the employee's name correct first and foremost, how they want to be referred to, looking into general information procedure, right? We're talking about those training materials, those basics, those FAQs are in place. Work time and pay, all that is checked out. It's clear to the employee. The job itself, right? Looking at that peer mentor, that buddy to help them out there, someone that they can kind of ask those questions to, those little idiosyncrasies that they might be coming across. And your philosophy and safety measures, what's the mission at hand here? What are you guys achieving? What are some safety precautions that they should actually really be taking into account? I think that's huge. My question for you, Leslie, is what are some of the key elements of a successful onboarding process that can actually leave a really positive first impression on seasonal employees and actually make them more likely to return into the future?
Yeah, I think the key is welcoming. Like, it needs to be welcoming to them, that they're not just a small part of the workforce. They are a critical part of what the company is doing and helping move them forward. In your case study here, the example about the name, I literally just read a book where the poor person's nameplate was wrong for her whole 12 months of employment.
Oh,
like, she
my
reported
God.
it to HR, but she was just a temp. So they left it wrong. And it was a funny story in the end, but it was like, this is a terrible example of how to be doing this. So all of those details matter. I had someone else where they didn't get their name on their door until I think they had actually resigned. So if your culture is to have your nameplate or badges, make sure all of those details matter and are correct. So that's welcoming in that piece of it. I also think, gathering, it may be basic information, but also fun and unique information for sharing. So taking pictures of new hires, being able to share what they want to share. So here's some general categories of information we like to share, but have space for showing personality and what they do for fun. And it's not all about work, but so that people can say, hey, I saw that you have this hobby. That's really cool, and want to talk to them. So again, it makes it feel welcoming. And I think highlighting the seasonal staff, so emphasizing their importance in the work environment, whether that's interns in their seasonal work and like the projects they completed, or we would, with our seasonal staff, we're able to serve X number more of customers. I think that really makes them feel part of the team and emphasizes their importance as well.
I really like that idea of making sure that existing workforce, existing staff, and new onboarded staff, seasonal employees really have a great relationship at the end of the day, and not necessarily forcing anyone's hand to the fire. I understand that this is shift-based work, right? It's really hard to get everybody even in the same room at a certain point. But when you maybe assign that buddy, taking them both out to lunch, making sure that, hey, they're both in this together, they're, having those conversations already from the get-go, they're feeling comfortable with one another. And eventually, I really do think that buddy is actually going to help assimilate those newer employees, that new employee into the culture a little bit more. So yeah, making sure that things like, again, like you said, their name is accounted for, it's correct from day one. It really will help actually in providing that, future onboarding, for the next season or the next time that you need to call upon somebody with a specific training or certification. They're going to love to come back because they're already assimilated. They're already familiar with a lot of the people there, the practices, whatever it might be. But yeah, you got the basics down. You got the welcome, you got the information, you got the time and pay, the job, and the philosophy already accounted for from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. In terms of steps that employers can take to ensure the first day is welcoming, informative, and engaging, what would you recommend in terms of actionable steps here?
I think clear directions is number one, what to expect. So whether that's arrival time, who's greeting them, all those details, providing clear directions. I'm a fan of company swag, whatever format is appropriate. If it's seasonal, maybe they're getting a hat or a shirt, something that makes them feel a part of that company and the culture. Creating a warm environment. So you don't want to be doing orientation in this dark back corner somewhere. So making sure that that space that they're coming into is a warm environment and that it's conducive for learning and safety. They need to feel safe so that they can ask questions to make sure everything's clear before they are kind of put to work. So the environment itself is critical.
I love that. And yeah, I think it kind of feeds into making sure that that feedback loop is available to them, that there's feedback mechanisms that they can actually reach out to, whether that's, employee surveys, like we have these shift-based surveys that are, after each shift, they get a survey sent out to them that's really quick, however you want to design it. It's really great to get some initial feedback from new hires and saying, hey, what is something that you are feeling we can do better on, or are you feeling, supported, safe, whatever it might be. And yeah, and making sure that those feedback channels are in full effect from day one. I think that's really important. In terms of some creative ways that employers have used or can recognize and reward hard work and dedication, what does that look like to you? What are some examples there to make sure that, throughout their employment, how can they boost morale, foster loyalty, and so forth?
So depending on the length of the season, I think providing recognition at certain intervals, maybe it's at 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, so that they are recognized as part of that. Recognizing all of their service. So if they're here for how many months this year, and then they're coming back next year, that they get credit for that time frame, so they're not starting over again. I think that's a key one. Even returning employees receiving additional compensation, or maybe that's, for the length of the season, maybe there's different bonus for completing the season or bonus for referring others. Because if they have a great experience and you want them to come back, and then they can have a referral bonus for bringing someone else along and recommending that they come and stay the next season.
I love that. Yeah, I think bonuses are absolutely huge. I think that's a really important reward recognition program that, of course, is more than welcome, right? I'm sure people are never turning that down. But yeah, even small things I think are really huge. Like, I love the idea of a referral program, kind of getting their friends involved, I think is really fun. A lot of times seasonal employees, whether it's even summer or winter, whatever it might be, yeah, having a buddy to do that with. I always hear about siblings or, friends that come in and say, hey, I had a really great experience with this job last year. You should totally join me. It would be really fun this year. So yeah, kind of putting that in their ear, I think, is a really great idea.
Yeah. And you don't want to overlook opportunities like shout outs or thank yous. Any of the tangible recognition there is important too, especially because they're there for a short time frame. So you want to make sure that they're receiving that regularly.
Absolutely. Oh, for sure. For sure. I think that's so key. To close out, I always like to ask my guest this last question. What are one or two top tips, actions, or takeaways our audience can leave with to more quickly onboard seasonal employees in the future?
Okay, I'm going to break the rules because it says one or two top tips. I have three.
There, go for it.
So first is knowing what is critical for the process, as well as knowing your audience and matching those. My second is to automate what you can for ease and consistency. Leverage technology anywhere that that's possible. And the third one is don't leave out the human part. We're hiring humans after all, so make sure no matter how much you focus on technology, consistency, all of that, that you're also considering the whole human as you create your process.
Awesome. Leslie, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, seriously, that was super educational. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience did too. We'll have to have you come back for, the summer season, right? Maybe we'll talk about some of those differences between, the holiday hiring versus those in the summer. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you. Again, for those in our audience who are listening on YouTube, feel free to throw in a comment on your favorite part of this webinar, talking, a little bit about what those seasonal hiring practices look like for you guys. If you guys have returning employees coming back this year, I would love to hear any and all questions, comments, concerns, whatever it might be. Throw it in the comment box. I would love to interact with you guys. And until the next time, I will see you all at the next webinar. Have a good one.